Today is a fascinating discussion we have planned for you. I'm joined by a special guest, someone that we've enjoyed hearing from in various different ways, both on radio and our podcast. He is the co host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, also directs the Ron Paul Institute for Peace. We are joined by Daniel McAdams. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for having me back on your show.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And when you're not busy being a viral sensation in India's social media, you are busy with Ron Paul having a lot of predictions come to pass in real time over the last few years, right?
Yeah, he sure does. I mean, every time you go back and look at what he said, it's spot on, right on the mark.
They say the prophet is not wanted in his own hometown, and it seems weird how everybody admits Ron Paul's right, but they still, both parties largely, don't want to commit to the package of liberty that he keeps prescribing throughout his career.
Yeah, they know he's right, but they want to ignore the reasons that he's right.
Exactly. I see that. I mean, every day you'll see conservatives and, big MAGA folks come out and say, Ron Paul is right about the FBI. Ron Paul's right about the war. Ron Paul, and it just can't seem to put it all together. Liberty's always passe. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's because everything is filtered through politics. I mean, politics runs these people's lives. And as you know very well, David, for us, it's not about politics. It's about principles, the principles of liberty. And that, you don't have to stick your finger up to figure out which way the wind's blowing. You just have to stick to those principles. And so while people would say Ron Paul was right about the FBI, their response will be not, well, let's get rid of it. It's like, let's put our guys in there. That'll fix it. So it's, everything is filtered through the prism of politics, which is one of the main things that's wrong with our society today.
So, when you see what you have been talking about on the program and your program every day, we're talking about the Ukraine war, all the different problems that are coming out of this conflict. It all seems to go back to the dollar. It all seems to go back to something monetary policy that you and Dr. Paul have been talking about and many others for many years. And here it is coming to fruition, the results of that monetary policy really taking a real dramatic turn right in front of our eyes.
Absolutely, the de-dollarization. And the ironic thing about this whole chapter, David, is that the U.S., instead of trying to forestall what may have been an inevitability anyway, is actually hastening the process, by making enemies overseas, by sanctioning Russia, by sanctioning every country we possibly can. It forces these countries to look for alternatives to the dollar and alternatives to trade with the U.S. And they've done so, and they've done so successfully in the case of Russia. And it leaves us holding the bag of a dollar that is no longer viewed as the gold standard of the world, for currency.
Right. And yet we're hearing that this new alignment taking place between Russia and China wants to, is it accurate to peg their currencies to some kind of attachment to gold? Can you explain any of that? I've heard that.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it's not a gold standard like what Ron Paul wants, right? But it's something.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it would work, but I have also read something like that there will be some sort of a peg to gold or some sort of a relation to gold. We do know that it's a fact that China and Russia are both buying up gold, as fast as they can get it. And I think India is as well. So these countries are stocking up on gold. And so they may have something in mind. They may see what happens to a currency when it gets debased to the point where ours is.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about, because we've talked about Ukraine, but this has led to some alignments like what we just saw, the historic deal that just was announced by China with Iran and Saudi Arabia coming to terms to be able to find a way to get along. This is something that, just a few years ago seemed inconceivable. And here we are. It's almost surreal to watch it.
It's a fundamental shift in the balance of power, I think, and I think it cannot be overstated how important it is. On so many levels. Okay, on one level, it's very important that Saudi Arabia and Iran have mended fences and are now established diplomatic relations. I believe those broke around 2016, and they attempted to rekindle these relations. And in fact, ironically enough, it was General Soleimani who was traveling to Saudi Arabia with a message from Iran when Donald Trump sent a few missiles his way and ended that rapprochement. So in this case, they weren't able to send any missiles anywhere to blow up China to stop it from happening. So it looks like it will happen. So that's very important. It's very important for the region. It solidifies the kind of the freezing out of the United States. I mean, the United States has become irrelevant.
Mhm.
And it also brings China in as great peacemakers. You know, it was a few weeks ago that they offered a suggestion for a peace plan in Ukraine, and of course, the West dismissed it out of hand. It wasn't viewed as being serious. And now here they are in Iran brokering a peace deal that will really change the way things happen in the Middle East. So Iran is taking on, China is taking on this role as global peacemaker, which is quite an interesting twist, I think.
And how is it an interesting twist?
Well, I mean, we've seen all along, for example, in Africa, China goes to these places and it brings business contracts and money. The U.S. goes to these places and it brings bombs, it brings threats, it brings sanctions, it brings regime change operations like we're seeing in Georgia right now. It's a classic U.S. regime change operation in effect. So, just the way these two countries are dealing with other countries, we tend to make enemies. The U.S. makes enemies overseas because people tend to not like it when you bomb them, strangely enough, David. And they tend to like it when you go over there and you bring something for it. And for better or worse, the Chinese bring goods and services that people want, and they bring it in a relative cheap way. And they don't really seek to influence, despite what a lot of the China haters in the U.S. will say, they don't really seek political influence for the sake of political influence in the countries they do business with. They seek to just simply do business. So China is emerging not only as a great economic powerhouse, but now as a great diplomatic powerhouse. Um, a lot of it, ironically, is just due to U.S. aggressive foreign policy.
Yeah. Now, some folks have said that globalists have been wanting to transition to the China model to be the new teacher's pet in the world stage. And Henry Kissinger and all this has been a long time coming to try to create the conditions for a new kind of model for all the world to be governed in imitation of. Do you see this as a controlled demolition of the United States government by globalist oligarchic forces who are saying, you know what? We've had a lot of fun with the American model. It's time to kind of control demolition and do a fire sale of the assets of this country in a slow process. And at the same time, transition to our new favored son, China, where we're going to have social credit scores and a little bit more authoritarian style capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of this sort of meta-analysis of what these great global games are. That may be the case, and we know people are behind the scenes pulling levers. But I try to look at the world as it is. That may well be the case. Um, it's hard to say, but I do know that China is on the ascendance. What that means, yeah, there is definitely a downside, and you've touched on quite a bit of it. The Chinese model is not something I would particularly like to emulate when you talk about things like social credit scores. When you talk about things like, yes, you can make money. China is more capitalist than we are, but don't go into the political realm. Don't dare challenge the political leadership, or you'll find yourself in trouble. Well, of course, we have that here in the U.S., and we're getting worse on that. We're getting worse on attacks on speech in the U.S., as we've learned from the Twitter files. So we're moving in their direction anyway. As to whether it's a big plan, it's hard to know. There's a lot of moving parts when you want to have some big global plan, and I don't know that these people are capable of such a thing.
I mean, but it's clear that you wouldn't be able to do the Ron Paul Liberty Report in China, criticizing China's government inside of China right now, right? Yeah,
Yeah, to a degree, we wouldn't, but we also, until we went over to Rumble, we were every day afraid that the
yeah,
government would be colluding with YouTube to knock us off because we weren't saying the things that our government wanted us to say about COVID. So,
sure, yeah.
we may not be to the degree that they are when it comes to criticizing politicians, but we're getting there. We're
Yeah.
getting there.
Well, they certainly destroyed our channel on YouTube and other platforms like it. But when you look at this recent uh, this bank run story that's coming out of Silicon Valley with that bank and some of the other banks that we're hearing having some issues right now as we record on this Monday, March 13th. How do you assess this playing into? I think I see it all connected with this Iran Saudi Arabia deal. I mean, this is the beginning of the end of this petrodollar alliance where, it was America and Saudi Arabia, and that's how we could, our military, their oil, and that's the currency, and everybody has to take it or leave it, and be in trouble if you leave it. That's changing now when the scapegoat, Iran, is now becoming friends with Saudi Arabia in real time. These banks, I think, are going to be in a more fragile footing going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analysis. I think that may well be the case. I think they are connected. The pivot is shifting away from the U.S. as an important center, and I think with that will become will go the strength of the dollar. And the sanctions on Russia were supposed to bring it to its knees. Kicking Russia out of the SWIFT system was supposed to bring Russia to its knees. And in fact, it's like when you cut the tail off a lizard, it starts to regrow the synapses, and that's what Russia did. It started regrowing its tendrils, making friends with China, making friends with India, making friends with Iran. And as you said when we started the show, that a new axis is developing, and it's based on the U.S. not being part of the world. So the more we think that the world is centered around us, in fact, would drive the rest of the world away, and with that goes our financial system as well, which is it's a house built on sand.
And Ron Paul has said that for many years, saying that the neocons are the true isolationists, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what we see emerging is a world order in which they're going to try to, get around and away from America as much as possible in Western Europe, which is an isolationist foreign policy, really.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Ironically, yeah, we get what we want. The neocons have poisoned the well so much that nobody wants to do business with us at all, except for corrupt leaders overseas, certainly in Europe, at least the current leaders in Europe, and in places like Georgia, where not necessarily the parliament, but the president, I would say, is definitely under the influence of the US and the West. So, yeah, we own all these people right now, but things can change. You never know.
Yeah, I'm looking at the kind of the narratives emerging. One person on Twitter, Nick Carter, had a Twitter thread said, "Dear God, Barney Frank," and I know he worked with Ron Paul a lot in Congress with some of the banking issues. It says, "Dear God, Barney Frank openly admits that Signature was arbitrarily shuttered despite no insolvency because regulators wanted to kill off the last major pro-crypto bank. This is a colossal scandal." And he's got a reference to a piece in CNBC.com, says why regulators seize Signature Bank in third biggest bank failure in U.S. history. And in that story, Frank is quoted saying, there was no real objective reason that Signature had to be seized. He says, quote, "I think part of what happened was that regulators wanted to send a very strong anti-crypto message. We became the poster boy because there was no insolvency based on the fundamentals." Any
Wow.
thoughts on this?
Well, I hadn't seen that before. That's pretty amazing if it's true. We certainly know that they want to get a hold of crypto. They don't want, the dream of crypto, which is to exist outside the control of government. They don't want that to happen. So, I mean, nothing surprises me, but it's pretty shocking how blatant things are these days. They used to try to hide this stuff.
Yeah. Do you see this as the beginning of a big Bear Stearns type moment potentially? This whole Silicon Valley Bank scandal?
Well, I'm really not qualified
Yeah.
to judge.
Yeah.
We certainly, when you look at the particulars of our economy, the things seem to be in place. We had 2 years of lockdown, which destroyed the country. You had the printing of what $6 trillion during COVID, which destroyed the currency. You have the sanctions on Russia that's made everything expensive and destroyed trade. And you had $100 billion going to Ukraine, which is destroyed. So basically, I mean, these guys are doing everything they can to try to destroy the economy. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if this is the beginning of something very big.
What are some of the moral lessons or things that we can take away from in this moment as people wonder what in the world's going to happen next? How do I protect my family? We don't know these. We don't know what tomorrow may bring, so we don't want to worry. But at the same time, what are some moral or, as you mentioned, spiritual or I mean, mentioned principles, but all these things kind of tie back to me for spiritual warfare. What can we learn in this moment as we kind of rest on a potential cliffhanger about what happens next to this country we've grown accustomed to have great wealth in for many decades?
Yeah, things are going to be changing, I think, and people are going to have to get used to it. And for me, that means you have to put family first. You have to understand the importance of your loved ones. For me personally, it's a matter of faith as well. There's a lot of comfort in for me personally in my religion. So I think a lot of these things are going to be important. I don't, unfortunately, I don't have to worry about banks crashing and losing a bunch of money because I don't have any money. So that's not a concern to me necessarily. But obviously, the future of what we do, trying to spread the message of liberty. If everyone is broke, it's going to be hard to keep doing it. But
Yeah.
it's get things in focus, and scale down, and remember what's important in life.
Yeah, very well said. That's something that we have an opportunity when you have recessions, you have an opportunity for spiritual correction as well, where you can kind of let loose of your false idols and realize how fragile we live when we are dependent on them for our sense of comfort, right? And wealth.
That's absolutely true. Do I really need that new car? Do I need this or that or the other? And it's important to keep those things in perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people lose sight when people talk about a system where we talk about non-aggression and liberty versus trying to police the world and police our economy. What we miss the sight is that absolutely with a freedom economy comes a great deal of incentive to be virtuous, to not be a spendthrift, spending everything and trying to
Yeah.
keep up with the Joneses. There's this, and I think it's largely media and government that has brainwashed the public to think if you're pro market, and that means you are pro whatever you want to do, nihilism, libertinism. That's just not true. And I think
Yeah.
that's going to come back into play here as people realize those are not associated with the same thing. You can be pro liberty and also be skeptical of materialism and chasing after money for money's sake, right?
And the perfect example is Ron Paul, who's done very well throughout his life. But he's done well not because he's started 50 businesses. He's done well because he's been thrifty. He pays cash for things. He views it as shameful if you have to take out a mortgage or if you have to take out a car loan. And people nowadays would look at that and say, how old fashioned, but he believes in working hard until you have the money and then buying it cash. And if everyone had that mentality, we'd all be in a lot better shape. I mean, I live in a part of Texas where there's a lot of new cars, and you go and you see someone with a $60,000 car, and they're living in just a very, very basic house, and you're thinking, man, you are leveraged to the hilt on your debts, and so that debt-free life and living within your means, there's no better example, in my opinion, than Dr. Paul. He could be driving easily a new Mercedes. He drives a Toyota, so that's just a good example. He doesn't need to have people, people, admiring the material things that he has. It doesn't mean anything at all to him.
Yeah. I mean, we would have to be a little skeptical maybe if for his recommendations about the gold standard if he had those $1 million watches and Rolexes like the TV evangelist saying, "Come on, you got to be for gold like me and my jumbo jet." But no, you're right.
Exactly.
He lives a life of humility, which makes his message of truth stand out through all these different ups and downs and political moments that we've been in.
I can imagine. I mean, people actually believe that it's a career to be a social media influencer. Can
Yeah.
you imagine someone in Dr. Paul's time? If you go back to when he was, a youngster, and someone would have said that, they would have thought the person was insane. It's no.
Right.
You go to medical school. You learn to start a business. You learn a trade. You learn how to do something and make something, and. But we've lost that. You're right. I mean, nihilism. We're in an age of absolute, complete nihilism, and that's pretty dangerous. I mean, we kind of deserve what's coming.
Yeah. So when we look at what is coming, there's a lot of things we can learn in terms, like you mentioned, uh, reevaluating what's important, reevaluating what's important to invest our time in, staying out of debt. I mean, Jesus talks a lot about staying away from being leveraged by lenders, lending money to us and getting us snatched up in the thralls of debt and prison, that the prison mindset that comes with a debt-based lifestyle.
That's absolutely true, and debt, you're beholden to someone, and you're also wasting a lot of money. And, I mean, I have certainly not been Dr. Paul. I've not been perfect with the way I've managed my finances off and on, but I know when I'm in periods of zero debt, I'm a much happier person because you don't feel the stress and the tension, and you don't see your money flying out the window with, paying interest rates and all of these sorts of things. So it's good for your mental health, your spiritual health, and your physical health to not have these massive burdens of debt for things that you just don't need.
Exactly. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time today, and I thank you for teaching us some of the principles that you guys have used to chart the news and all the different stories that we've seen. And we want to continue to watch with great interest what you guys have to share for us on the Ron Paul Liberty Report. So make sure you go to Rumble and subscribe to their channel, the Ron Paul Liberty Report. And also, of course, keep in touch with the Ron Paul Institute, where you can see some great analysis on what's happening with foreign affairs, like this historic Iran-Saudi Arabia deal.
Thanks very much, David. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.